Okay, Tuesday, Tuesday, 11 o'clock, we're going to get started with natural sciences, modern natural sciences. Let's see, last week we had our first introductory class. Today we're going to get into our first actual lesson. These lessons are recorded, so while it's great for you guys to join me live, you can also watch these lessons recorded. They'll be posted on the modern biology course page, and as we go along, we'll get into other sciences as well. So today, what we're going to do is get into the beginning of the study of biology, which is the first science we're going to focus on. We're going to explain what the different sciences are, and you can see behind me, there's a list of 3 modern natural sciences, which make up the normal high school or college program. It's biology, physics, and chemistry. We'll talk about what they are a little bit, talk about what science really is, what the scientific method is, and then get started with biology studies, and then work through this book. One of the things that's worth noting is when we talk about science studies, you have to realize that the scientific knowledge is impossible. It's infinite, right? You can go on forever. So we have to always ask the question, how much do we actually need to know? Like how much do you want to know? Do we want to study every blade of grass, every single plant that exists in a field? These studies go on forever and ever and ever. We can go microbiology. We're going to look at microscopic objects. Like, how far do we want to go? We can just keep going and going and going. Same thing with, if we go to astronomy and look at outer space. I mean, we could just go on and on and on. So anytime we talk about natural sciences, we have to realize that there's a sort of a limit as to what we're going to pursue, because these studies can go on forever. So with modern high school studies, there's sort of a normal limit of what needs to be known, like basic kind of information. We'll probably go beyond most of that stuff, but just realize that natural science studies, they would go on forever. You'd have to be God yourself to like master natural science. So it's kind of a ridiculous pursuit just because it goes on forever. So we'll want to understand what exactly these sciences are. What's the goal of studying these different sciences? When do we know that we're done? Like, when do we say, okay, that's enough. I can stop studying biology now, and so on. So we'll talk about all that stuff as we get into this. So let me share my screen, and we'll get working on this. Remember that all these lessons are available in recorded form. So if you can't make a live class, that's fine. I'll still produce the videos for the classes and just post them on the course pages. All right. So we're going to get started here with biology. Last week we had an introductory lesson. We talked about what science really is. We explained that the natural sciences, the interest in modern science developed in the 1600s. We talked about why it developed. I talked about the name Francis Bacon. And that there's an important division between modern natural science and like ancient philosophy and Catholic religion. Modern science allows people to ignore religion and philosophy. So anyone who doesn't want to believe in God, or who doesn't want to think about morals, or doesn't want to talk about ethics and things like that, can simply say, oh, I'm a scientist. I'm just going to focus on what's material. And what we're going to find is that none of the most important questions in life are answered by material investigations or material experiments. If I were to ask a question like, what's the purpose of our life? There's no scientific answer, right? So just think how ridiculous it is to live pretending that you're just scientific when you won't be able to answer basic questions about yourself. What happens when I die? Science can't answer that question. Do I have a soul? Science can't answer that question. Where did we come from? Science can't answer that question. Where did the whole entire world come from? Science can't answer that question. So you can see science, if when people decide that they're just going to be scientific, they actually make themselves very dumb, and they can answer very few questions. and they spend their whole life just trying to make money by gathering information while ignoring all the glaring questions of life. So for intelligent Christian people, you know, I really believe that we're the only ones who can actually understand science rightly and put it in its right place and actually make good use of it. And that's why the greatest discoveries in history are usually made by philosophical or religious people, because they have science in its proper place. And when you put it in its place, it actually becomes very useful, like a tool. It's like it's like a man who has a certain tool, like a, let's say, a hammer, and he decides he's going to identify by the hammer. You know, that's going to be how he identifies himself, as a hammerer, a person who uses a hammer. Well, that's pretty dumb, because there's a lot more there's a lot more to be done in life than just walk around swinging a hammer. But at the same time, if you have a balanced, full life, a hammer is very useful. And that's really what science is. So what I'd like to do is get into this first lesson in biology, and I'd like to make sure we understand what the three different kinds of sciences are, what we actually study in science, and so on. And you're going to see that the science is very, very limited in what it can do. And that's what's important to understand about it. It serves a very limited use. And if we try to do more with science than science can actually do, we just become crazy people. And most people who talk about science talk like crazy people. They talk about things science can't possibly help with. They try to answer questions science can't possibly answer, and they just become crazy. So we'll talk about that later. To get started with our book here, let's just get into this. This first chapter provides us with an introduction. You can see it's titled Introduction, and it's actually pretty helpful. So the first question is, what do we mean by science? Because we can go back into ancient history and see that Aristotle talked about science. But when he talked about science, he didn't mean the same thing as modern schools mean when they say the word science. When Aristotle talked about science, it was a certain kind of knowledge. I don't know what your interests are, but you know the difference between being familiar with something and having a real masterful knowledge of it, right? So let's say you're interested in sports. Maybe sports isn't a good idea. Let's say you're interested in working in the garden. Let's say you have a garden, you're interested in gardening and plants and stuff like that. So there's most people are familiar with the garden. They could name some of the most common plants. They could say, oh, that's a tomato. That looks like a cucumber plant. They can name a few plants. Maybe they can name a few characteristics about things. They know some basics about gardening. They know that you have to fertilize the soil. They know that you need sunlight. They know that you have to water the plants. So they've got some familiar knowledge of the things. Well, that's not science, okay? So for Aristotle, science was systematic, complete knowledge of a subject. So for Aristotle, when he used the word science, he meant that you were a master of that subject. So you knew every detail about it. You could like go to a whiteboard like this, and you could just start writing an outline of all the different parts of the subject and break it down into different groups and categories. You could talk about the causes of that subject, the origin of everything. You could define all the terms. You can explain all the principles and rules. For Aristotle, that's what was meant by science. Okay, it meant systematic knowledge or mastery of a subject. That's not what science means in modern circles. In modern circles, science means the study of physical things, right? Study of physical things. That's what we mean by science in modern circles. So we've got to make sure we keep these words separate and don't get that stuff confused, because they mean different things. So the first sentence of this book says, science deals with that material which occupies all the space around us. Science deals with material. That's the key. Science in a modern sense, science is a study of material. So material things. Anything that's not material can't be studied by science. So like I said, if you have a soul and that soul is not material, science can't help you with that. If God is a spirit and a spirit is not composed of material, science can't answer any questions about God. Angels or spirits, science can't help us. Anything that's not material, science can't help us with. So once you think about that, you say, okay, so no questions about God will be answered by science. No questions about any spirits will be answered by science. No questions about human soul will be answered by science. That really takes out most of the most important questions. Morals, for example, are not material, right? Like whether I can tell a lie or whether I can covet. These things are not material. Whether I should love my neighbor, well, that's not material. So you can just see by the time we get done, we've got a list of topics. And even though there's lots of things we could study that are material, when we talk about importance in terms of what things we need to study and learn and think about in life, the most important subjects, the most important questions are all off the table for science. It's got to do with material things and only material things. So that's the first thing to realize. Science is the study of material things that occupy the space around us. Are they important? Yeah, of course they're important, right? Of course they're important. So for example, to study different plants and understand why did God make all these different plants? If I look into a field, I can see all different color flowers. I can see all different kinds of plants, all different kinds of seeds being produced by plants, all these different kinds of, why do all these different kinds of plants exist? Is there a reason? Did they actually do something, or are they all just random? Some people will argue that they all have some kind of functional purpose, like a medicinal purpose. Well, that obviously is pretty important, especially if we have sicknesses and things that they might be the solution for. But it's limited to material things. So plants and animals, living things, dead things that exist in matter like rocks. That's all that we can study with science. So is it important? Yeah, it's in science. Yeah, it's important. But it's just, one part of our life and one part of the learning that we need. So science deals with material things. It's materialistic, all right? We can't live a life based on science because we'd have to assume that nothing spiritual exists. And that's what, many modern scientists do. They assume that, which can't be assumed scientifically. So like I said, you just become crazy when you think like that. So what are these material things? Well, we have a list: air, water, and the earth are a few things, but it gets more complicated than that. Because if I were to ask you a question like, what is fire, right? It's pretty simple for us to understand that water is material. It's pretty easy to understand that the earth, dirt, for example, is material, or that the leaf of a plant is material. The body of an animal is material. A stone is material. Okay, that's all pretty simple. But what about light? Is light material? What about fire? Is fire material? So we're going to have to define material and figure out what exactly it means, because I can see light. Does that mean it's material? I can feel heat. Does that mean it's material? I can see fire. But if I weigh fire on a scale, does fire have any weight? Is it material? So you can see that we're going to get into questions that science can't necessarily answer for us. And the scientists are going to talk about things based on their material ideas. And there are going to be subjects that are very, very important that they can't talk about, like light and fire, for example. If we go through this book, we'll probably never find any discussion of light or fire, even though they're some of the most important influences in our lives. So you're going to see, if you have an open mind towards science, you're going to see that if you try to be scientific in your thinking, you run into lots of problems. Okay, you run into all kinds of problems, and so we've got to think critically as we study through this book, and that's what I'd like to do. So remember, science demands proof. Science demands proof. When you come to religion, you're taught God made the world, and you have no proof of that. You're told to believe that. You're taught that the body will rise from the dead. There's no way that I can prove that to you. I can't take you outside and say, hey, Blaze, come here. I want to show you something. I want to show you how a body rises from the dead. I can't do that, right? It's not scientific. It's based on faith. And there's a bazillion things that we accept by faith every day. Our minds are designed to live and work by faith. We trust all kinds of things all day long. But when it comes to science, no one is allowed to tell us to believe something that's supposedly scientific. So you've got to learn to discipline yourself mentally to say, I am not going to accept any fact that's presented to me as scientific unless I have access to the evidence, because that's what it means to be scientific. So we've got to be very careful when we talk about science. We can't allow science to turn into a religion where we're being told what's true and false with no evidence. The minute we start to do that, we're no longer practicing science. And you've got to learn this as a discipline. When we talk about science, there has to be material proof for the things that we say. And if there is no proof, then we're actually learning a religion where we're simply being taught what to believe with no proof, and that's not scientific. So as we go through this textbook, I want to really encourage you to be critical about everything, because that's what science is. Be critical. If there's a statement in the book, ask, where is the proof for that statement? Don't allow yourself to start accepting all kinds of assumptions in the name of science when there's no evidence, because if you do that, you can allow yourself to be led to all kinds of false conclusions, because you're not actually practicing science. You're just letting someone tell you what's true and false. If I tell you that, under the earth, there's a giant ocean of burning lava, and the whole center of the earth is lava, and you just sit there and say, oh, okay, and you write it down, like middle of earth is full of lava, that's not science, right? That's not science. That's a kind of religion. And we have to discipline ourselves, because modern science classes, modern science teachers, they don't practice science. They quickly move into something that's like religion, where the teacher and the textbook are just telling students what to think and what to believe, and that's not science. So I want to challenge you to be critical as we study. Anytime you study anything that claims to be science, be critical, be a jerk, and demand proof, because that's what science is supposed to be. If you have a headache and someone comes up to you and says, here, take this pill, it will help your headache, you should demand evidence. And you see, we don't do that. People have all kinds of things. They'll say, oh, well, if you have a sore throat, it's because you eat too much sugar. You need to prove it. I'm not going to accept any scientific thing that you tell me. Any material statements that you make, I don't have to accept them unless you provide evidence. And if you can't provide evidence, what in the world are you doing telling people facts about material things if you don't have any evidence for what you're saying? So we have to learn in science to not be friendly. Don't be nice in science. Don't be friendly. If someone says something, don't say, oh, okay, that's not how science works. And you'll see all the time, people will push things on you, materially speaking, talking about, oh, do this, take this, try this, don't eat that, you need to do this, oh, you need 8 hours of sleep, you need this. How can anybody say these things if they don't provide evidence? So if we're going to be scientific, we have to demand evidence, all right? If I tell you that Jesus rose from the dead and you say, prove it, I'm going to say no, because I'm not presenting this as a scientific fact. I'm presenting this as an article of faith, and that's fine, because I'm honest. I'm telling you, this is something you should believe. But if I say to you, oh yeah, water, if you drink more water, you won't have any headaches. You should be able to say to me, Mr. Michael, you can't tell me drinking water is going to take my headache away unless you can prove it. And I can't say, oh, no, this is an article of faith. You just need to trust me and believe. No, that's not how material things work. Okay. So you have to learn to be tough and to be critical and to not accept things anyone says, or you're going to end up just believing a religion that you've been taught in the name of science. And that's the opposite of what science is supposed to do. Science is supposed to set you free as an individual to test everything. So if you see a rock outside and you wonder what's under that rock, right? You don't have to sit there and listen to someone tell you what's under the rock and believe them. What you do is you go and lift up the rock and look under it. That's what science does. So science puts you in control of your own knowledge and tells you, if you're curious to know what this bug eats, why don't you go study it? Go study it. You don't have to listen to, let's say your mother. She's going to say, oh yeah, beetles eat whatever. That's science says, no, your mother is not an authority on what beetles eat, right? You're allowed to go and study the beetle and see what they eat and learn by experimentation. So you have to want to have that kind of freedom to think according to what's actually true and can be proven through an experiment, not trust people in the name of science. Most people, and if you put this to the test in your life, just start paying attention. Pay attention to any time you hear people talking about the natural world or science or technology. Pay attention to how much they say that they never provide any evidence for. When you start to realize how bad it is, you're going to feel like you're going crazy. But it's good for you to learn that, because so much of what's presented to us in the name of science or some kind of knowledge of the natural world is just beliefs. There's no evidence for it. It's just guesses and assumptions or beliefs about what people would like to work. And it's usually related to money making. The guy who's making the bottled water is going to try to convince you that water is the cure for every single problem in life. You got a sore leg, you probably need some more water. Well, that's just salesmanship, right? He's just trying to sell you water. The same thing is true for medicines. The same thing is true for foods and plants and animals and all this other stuff. So much of it is driven by sales and marketing and trying to sell stuff that you really can't allow other people to tell you what's true. You have to have a scientific mindset. And I think that's something that's freeing as an individual, to say like, no, I don't have to listen to you tell me what I need to eat to make my headache go away. I can research this myself and figure things out. All right, so science deals with material, and it depends on evidence. We study things around us like air, water, and the earth. And the scientific name for this material is matter. So we use this word matter when we talk about science. And, I guess it makes us feel smarter to say matter, but all matter means is material. Anything that's material is matter, okay? The technical definition of matter, I don't know if we're going to get to this in the book or not, but the technical definition of matter is anything that has mass and takes up space. That's the definition of matter, scientifically. Anything that has mass and takes up space. And we're going to learn there's a difference between mass and weight. Mass and weight. You might not think they're the same. If I ask, how heavy are you? You'd probably go step on a scale and say, I weigh, 100 pounds or whatever. Well, that's your weight. That's not necessarily your mass. Because if we take you to another planet, if we bring that scale with us and go to the moon, and we put the scale on the moon and you step on the scale, it's going to give a different result. So what is your actual mass? That's the question. It's not the same as weight, because your weight, with what the scale actually reads, will change in different places. So weight and mass are not the same thing. Matter is defined as anything that has mass and takes up space, okay? So we're going to get into all those distinctions as we get into physics, especially. That's where we really get into that stuff. But matter is just material. Any physical thing is matter. And in science, we study matter. Matter is the building material of the world in which we live, the building material of the world in which we live. So in the chat, just give me some feedback here. If we were to go and look at your bed in your room, what is the matter of which your bed is composed? What is the matter of a bed? Wood, okay? Could also be plastic, could also be metal, all right? But it's wood. And yet if I were to point to a tree and I say, well, what's the matter that tree is made of? What would you say? What's the matter that the tree is made of? Wood. Well, that's a part of it, right? There's more in that tree than just wood. What else is in that tree? No, what's in the tree? What's the matter that the tree is made of? Yes, sap, water. You could keep going. It gets more complicated, okay? So there's more in that tree than just wood. There's water all through that tree. There's sap in that tree. There's a lot more going on in there than just, it's not just a big chunk of wood. Whereas if we were to go look at your bed and say, well, what matter is this? You might say it's wood, but there's no sap, there's no water in it. So it's different, but it's the same material is in a tree and in the bed. Another difference is that in the tree, you just have sort of the raw form of wood in nature, whereas in a bed, that material has been taken and has been shaped according to a design. And so now you've got both a design and material. The design is called form, and the material we call matter. So in a piece of furniture, you have form and matter, the design and the material. So you need to learn to think in those terms. There's form and matter in anything that you see, but to think about what is the matter that's present in a certain object. Think now of an animal. If we have a cat sitting in front of us and I say, what is the cat made up of? What is the matter of the cat? You'll see this gets very complicated. So answer me that. What is the matter that's present in a cat? We don't just refer to it as cat. That's not the material. Organs, what are they made of? Just think, what is an organ made of? Water. Okay, there's water inside of a cat. That's true. We could say fur, but what is fur made of? And then you say cells. And you see what's going to happen is I'm going to say, prove it, prove it. What are you talking about? Have you ever seen a cat cell? Why are you talking about cells if you've never even seen a cat cell before? How do you know they even exist? Atoms? You've never seen an atom. How do you know an atom even exists? And so you can see, as soon as we start to talk about this stuff, we realize this isn't so simple. This isn't so simple. And what most people talk about when they talk about science isn't actually science. It's sort of a dumbed down school version or a dumbed down, just American version of scientific talk that really isn't science. So this is the kind of stuff I want to get into in studying natural sciences. I don't want to have a dumbed down high school biology class. I want to actually be careful and study what science really is. So we're going to get into this. But this word matter, I want to make sure you understand what matter is. Matter is the building material of the world in which we live. So anything that you can see, touch, taste, feel, smell is material. It's matter, okay? Science studies matter. Anything that's not material, like form, like I just mentioned, form, like the design of the bed, well, science can't study that. And so you can see, man, science really doesn't help us too much because a lot of the important stuff we have to talk about isn't matter and therefore is not scientific. All right. So matter, key term there. What is science? Science is the study of matter. What is matter? Matter is the material building stuff of the world that we live in. All right. We then read matter exists in two distinct states. So this gets very interesting. Okay, matter exists in two distinct states. We could talk about different forms we find matter in. But matter exists in two distinct states. And in the textbook here, it teaches us these two words, organic and inorganic. So we have organic matter and inorganic matter. two kinds of matter, organic and inorganic. And what most people think about when they hear these words is not what it actually means. Most people think that organic means living material and inorganic means dead material, but that's not what they mean. Organic material, and I really want to emphasize this because most students get this wrong. They read this and they miss this point in the lesson. Organic material is not material that's living. It's material that is living or has ever lived or could live. All right. So for example, if I go out in the garden to the compost pile, I've got a big pile of stuff in a compost pile. There's all kinds of stuff in there. Most of it is organic material. It's material that can live. It may be material that once was living, but is now dead. It's organic material. Inorganic material means matter that can never live. It's never going to live. It never has lived. It's inorganic. Okay, so an example of inorganic material would be stone. Stone is inorganic material. Okay. But the soil in the garden, it's partly organic, partly inorganic, right? We're going to learn about minerals. Minerals, it's good to think about minerals as like stones, basically, because minerals are not living. They don't live. But also in the soil, there's like dead animal bodies, there's dead insect bodies, there's dead plants in the soil, and it's all mixed together. So the soil is a mixture of organic and inorganic. Organic doesn't mean living. It means something that has lived or can live or is a part of a living thing, and so on. So we've got to understand the two different states of matter, organic and inorganic. Okay. And it defines it here well, but like I said, most students read this and they miss it. They think that organic means alive and inorganic means dead. So if we're driving down the road and there's a dead deer body laying on the road, they'd say, oh, look, that's inorganic matter. And that's not true. That's organic matter. Okay, it's a dead animal, but it's organic matter. So the lesson tells us this. It says matter may be living or may have been alive at some previous time, in which case we speak of it as organic matter. So you see, organic doesn't mean alive. It means it has lived or can live or is a part of living matter. Or it may have never been alive, and this state is called inorganic. So make sure you understand the difference between organic and inorganic. Now, when you go to the grocery store and people talk about organic food, it has nothing to do with this. Okay, so if I say, is your orange juice organic? That's got to do with selling food in a supermarket. That's got nothing to do with the study of science. So when we say organic, what do we mean by organic food? If I say, our spinach is organic, what does that mean? Most of your families probably talk about these things. What does it mean for a food to be organic? What do you think that means? Give me a quick answer. Not sprayed with chemicals, no pesticides. Right. So we have this idea that organic food is like natural food, right? We're not spraying some chemical on it to kill all the bugs. So we're not eating this chemical, whatever it may be, because the scientists supposedly tell us it's safe. And then we find out that there's like a third eye growing in the middle of our head because of the spray. And the scientists were wrong because they never actually proved that scientifically. And we accepted it as scientific. You can see the problem with science, right? So when we talk about organic foods, that has nothing to do with this idea of organic matter. It's not the same thing. Organic, it's just a marketing term that really means like healthy or natural in foods. That's got nothing to do with this organic. All right. So just to be clear with the words we're using, organic means anything that's living. Most of the stuff that is, in a compost pile, for example, is organic matter. Your body is alive, but it's composed of both organic matter and inorganic matter. So there's inorganic matter in your body. Can anybody give me an example of inorganic matter in your body? Can you think of anything that's inorganic? No, not necessarily something you ate. If you eat vegetables, that's organic. If you eat plant, animal meat, that's organic. Calcium in your bones, very good, Xavier. So minerals, right? Minerals are inorganic. And what that means, a very good way to understand organic and inorganic is if we made a big pile of stuff to burn in a fire, right? We threw all kinds of stuff in there. We threw plants in there. We threw dead animal bodies in there. We threw all kinds of stuff, wood, metal, the kitchen sink. We throw all kinds of stuff into a big, huge pile and we set it on fire. What's going to happen is all of the organic material, just about all of the organic material is going to disappear. It's going to burn away. And most of what's left over is going to be inorganic material. Not all of it, because there's some organic material that won't burn, but most of the organic material will burn away. And most of what will be left behind will be inorganic material. So all the minerals and things like that, they're going to stay behind. Most of the organic matter is going to go away. If you bury something underground, if it's organic matter, if you bury it underground, it'll likely break down and turn into dirt or turn into, back into its original elements. Organic matter decays. Organic matter can grow and so on. Inorganic matter doesn't decay. It's always the same. You can divide it up into pieces, like you can take a stone and crush it into powder, but it's still inorganic material, inorganic matter. So just make sure you have it clear in your head what organic and inorganic means, because that's how you understand what the different sciences are, all right? In the different sciences, like physics, for example, studies inorganic matter. Chemistry normally studies inorganic matter. There's another kind of chemistry that studies organic matter. It's called organic chemistry. So the actual study of your bodies and plants and food and things like that is organic chemistry. Biology is the study of living things. Obviously, it's concerned with both organic and inorganic material. All right, so far we've talked about what science is. And I said, you've got to commit mentally, you've got to commit to say, if I think scientifically, I'm not going to accept any facts unless I have evidence. That's a mental discipline that you have to have if you're going to be scientific. And like I said, most people don't do that. They just start believing stuff. They start repeating things that the textbook says so they can get a good grade on the test. And they walk around thinking they're scientific, but they're not, because they have no evidence. We talked about what matter is, and we talked about two kinds of matter, organic and inorganic. All right. Let's learn now about biology. So this is a biology class, the first science we study. Biology is the science which treats of matter in a living state. Biology is the study of living matter. In Greek, the word bios, B-I-O-S, means life. So biology means the study of life, the study of living things. And living things divide into two kinds. There's plants and animals. Okay, so biology divides into two different sciences. And you see the names here. Botany. Botany is the study of plants. And zoology is the study of animals, because the word zoe in Greek means life. So botany is the study of plants, and zoology is the study of animals. So a veterinarian studies zoology. A gardener studies botany, okay? Biology is the study of matter in a living state. It divides into two kinds because there's two kinds of living things. There's plants and animals. The study of plants is botany. The study of animals is zoology. Okay, so that's pretty simple. We've got a definition for biology, and we've got the two divisions of biology. Now look at this next section. This stresses what I have been saying to you. Knowledge in science is gained by observation. And I just want you to think, just think, if you can think honestly, how much of the scientific information that you've heard or been told, or that comes out of your mouth, things you say, how much of it is actually based on observation? Actually, very little. And this is the problem with modern science. very little of what we talk about scientifically is actually based on observation. So for example, if I say, do dinosaurs exist? Are there, is there any such thing as dinosaurs? Did dinosaurs ever really exist? What's your answer to that question? Did dinosaurs ever exist? What's your answer as a scientist? So Xavier, you have observed evidence of the existence of dinosaurs? Yes or no? You've observed evidence and confirmed that dinosaurs exist? No. So why would you say dinosaurs exist? Because you see, it's like a religion almost, right? You feel like there's pressure to say the right answer, where you've never observed any evidence of dinosaurs. So you should say, I don't know, right? That's the right answer. The right answer is, I personally don't know if dinosaurs have ever existed. I don't know. And I'm saying that myself. I don't know. I've never observed a dinosaur, obviously. I've never observed evidence that a dinosaur exists. So if you ask me and say, hey, William Michael, do dinosaurs exist? The only answer that I can possibly give that's scientific is, I don't know if dinosaurs exist. And we have to learn to do that. Now, you're going to start asking about all this stuff. Oh, because there's bones, because there's fun. It's not that simple, okay? It's not that simple. I've seen their footsteps in a museum. It's not that simple. So let's talk about what you actually see and what you actually are taught, all right? You go to the museum, and I've done this. I went to the Natural History Museum in New York City, and you walk into the museum, and there's this giant dinosaur on display, right? What's the problem with the giant dinosaur? What's the problem? What's the problem with this giant dinosaur that we see if we walk into the museum? Not full. People don't know that that's how it went together. So the problem is, okay, what you see there in the museum is part science and part theory. Okay, so scientists may have found some bones under the earth, and they pull up these bones, and then the scientists begin to work on them using the scientific method. But what they do is they theorize about what those bones might be, or what the animal might have looked like. And then what they do is they actually theorize about that animal, and they create the animal, or they make a model of an animal, and only pieces of it are actually real fossils. All of the rest of it is a theory of what the animal looked like. One interesting study that I recommend you do is, go online sometime if you're allowed and search for, let's say, like a hippopotamus skull. Okay, look at the skull of an animal. Look at the skull of a horse or any animal. Take a dog, cat. Look at the skull. You'll be amazed at how difficult or how different the skull is from the appearance of the animal. If all you had was the skull, you'd have no idea what the horse actually looked like, or what the dog or cat actually looked like. And yet this is what scientists are doing. They're finding some bones, or maybe even a skull, and they're taking the skull and then they're theorizing about what the animal actually looked like. And like I said, if you look at the skulls of animals that you're familiar with, like a horse or a dog or a cat, you'll be amazed at how different the skull looks than the actual animal. So it's not that simple. So we've got to respect the difference between scientific facts and scientific theories. And most people in modern society are not careful to distinguish between scientific fact and scientific theory. Okay, so if I walk into the museum and I see this large dinosaur, and I find out that out of these 250 bones that have been put together to make this giant dinosaur, only 7 of them are actually real bones. I have to realize that this is a theory. This animal here is a theory of what this animal may look like as a result of scientists finding some parts of an animal. Okay, so it's a theory. And the whole point of science is we're supposed to look at that and we're supposed to put it to the test and ask whether we think that theory is actually true or whether we think that theory is the best explanation of what's actually been found. And very few people do that. They just walk up there and they say, oh, wow, look, Stegosaurus, take 5 pictures and go and talk about Stegosauruses for the rest of your life. And that's not scientific, all right? So we've got to be careful to be scientific. Knowledge in science is gained by observation, by observation. And if you don't have a way to observe the things that are being talked about, you have no way to talk about them scientifically, all right? Knowledge in science is gained by observation. So for example, before, one of you mentioned cells in the body. If you've never observed a plant cell, or if you've never observed an animal cell, what are you actually talking about? Scientifically, you have no knowledge of cells. So how can you talk about the existence of a cell? What you're actually doing, and again, I don't think people realize this enough, you're actually believing something that you have been told exists, that you yourself have never observed. And yet people will say, well, I don't know if I believe in God because, I've never seen God before. I've never talked to God. I've never heard God speak or any. So I don't know if I believe in God. And they're very critical of religion. And yet then you listen and they'll talk about 5,000 different things in the natural world that they've never seen, never heard, never experienced. And they talk about them as if they're as real as can be. And there's no way to do that. It's not reasonable, not scientific, but that's how our society works. So I want you to learn, again, this is the challenge of science. Can you have the discipline? Can you have the discipline? Can you have the humility to say, I don't know, or I need to study that, or I need to check out what evidence is available before I answer that question? That's the mindset that's needed to be truly scientific. So if somebody's got a headache, do you start talking and say, oh, you know what takes away headaches? Oh, rubbing some 4-leaf clover on your nose, that takes away headache. If you don't have evidence that demonstrates that to be true, why would you say that? Why would you say that to someone if you have no evidence to prove that that's true? We have to learn to stop talking like that, because what that really is, that's superstition, right? It's like saying, oh, I always play well in my baseball games when I carry a rabbit's foot. I keep my rabbit's foot tucked in my sock when I play baseball, and it helps me to hit better. Well, that's just as crazy as telling somebody that rubbing a dandelion, on their eye is going to cure their cancer, right? It's just that it's that dumb to talk like that when there's no evidence of these things. If you want to say you believe that, like you're just religious, like you're some kind of witch doctor, and you say, yeah, I believe that if you say unga bunga 3 times and, dance around in a bowl full of blood, it makes your head, well, that's just superstition. That's just crazy religion. That's not science. And most of the stuff we hear people talking about, they have no evidence for what they're saying. It's just crazy witch doctor stuff. So it's a mental discipline that we have to learn to say, I'm going to be very careful that when I talk about material things, I only talk about things that I can prove to be true. And once we realize how few things there are that we can actually prove to be true, we're going to learn that it's really difficult to talk about anything scientifically. And that's the whole point. The whole point of science is it's very difficult to actually talk about anything scientifically. That's the point. We want to be careful. We want to experiment and research and test things before we go around telling people, what's going to make them better or what makes them sick and so on. So we've got to test things scientifically. And it's also important to think about, let's say we talk about our bodies, right? Our bodies, we believe we believe that our bodies are composed of a body and a soul, right? And our bodies are influenced by spiritual things. We believe that. I'm allowed to believe that because I honestly say I believe it. I'm not pretending it's scientific fact. I'm saying I believe that we're composed of body and soul. And I can make arguments that are philosophical or religious that make it seem likely that we do have a soul. Well, how do you know that a headache, for example, isn't caused by a spiritual problem? How do you know that your allergies are not caused by something like being nervous or anxious or tired or some other, maybe it's not caused by pollen. I can make an argument that pollen doesn't cause allergies. Well, how can I prove that? Well, if I take 10 people and put them out in the middle of a field and there's pollen in the field, do all 10 of those people get allergies? Yes or no? What do you think? If I put people out in a field and there's pollen in the field, does everybody get allergies? No. So does pollen cause allergies? Yes or no? How can pollen cause allergies if Frank is breathing in the pollen and he doesn't get allergies? Mary over there, her eyes are red and she's sneezing all over the place, and they're both standing in the same air, breathing the same air, and you're going to say that what's in the air causes allergies? Well, then why isn't Frank sneezing? He's breathing the same air. So you just see it's more complicated than that, right? It's not just pollen causes allergies, because if that was true, then everybody who breathes in pollen would have allergies, and that's not true. So you can see that these things are more complicated than that, okay? It's more complicated. Do peanuts cause allergies? Yes or no? Do peanuts cause allergies? You're saying yes, but if I eat peanuts, there's no allergies. So do peanuts cause allergies? How can peanuts be the cause if I don't have any allergy when I eat peanuts? Now, okay, so Gianna says, well, for some people, Xavier says for some, well, think about it, right? Would it make any sense if something is true only for some people? Would it make sense to say that that's the cause? Yes or no? Does it make sense to say that's the cause when it only affects some people? That doesn't make any sense. And so you just see there's a difference to talk scientifically. Obviously, this is more complicated than saying peanuts cause allergies or saying pollen causes allergies, because two people can be standing in the same exact room. One of them has allergies, one of them has no allergies. Obviously, the room and what's in the room is not the cause. There's more to it than that. But you can just see how sloppy we are, how careless we talk about this stuff. And when we do that, we get into all kinds of craziness because the problems might be different than we think they are. So that's what I want you to think about, all right? If it was a cause, it would have its effect. Let's talk about another cause, all right? Does fire cause a body to be burned? Does fire cause a body to be burned? If I take 100 people and throw them all into a furnace where it's 1,000 degrees, is the fire going to cause their bodies to be burned? Yes. All right. If there's 100 people thrown into the fire, 100 people will burn in the fire. And you can say, well, what about, the story of Daniel and his friends in the lion's den? That's a miracle. That's a miracle. That's what a miracle is. It's where a cause does not actually have its effect. That's what a miracle is, right? But if I take 100 people and put them in a fire, 100 of them will burn. The fire is the cause of the burning, okay? If I take 10 people and put them out on the beach, will all 10 people get red with sunburn? Yes or no? Does the sun cause sunburn? No, it's not that simple, right? Some people can be out on the beach all day long, no suntan lotion or nothing, and they won't get burned. Some other people can be out on the beach for 5 seconds and they'll look like a lobster, right? Turn red and be crying about it's more complicated than that, Okay, it's more complicated than that. So we've got to learn, if we're going to be scientific about things, we've got to learn to be more careful. And you can just see as we talk about these things, how careless we are when we talk about things like natural causes and stuff like that. So the point for today's lesson is we've got to cultivate, we've got to commit to developing a scientific mind. When we talk about scientific things, we've got to have scientific standards. If you can't prove it, you should not say it unless you're willing to say that you simply believe it. And that's fine. If you say, I believe that cat hair gives me allergies. Okay, well, that's, you're adding some details there, right? You're saying cat hair gives me allergies. And that may be true because anytime we put you in the presence of a cat, you may get allergies. We could lock you inside of a room where there's nothing in there at all, and you're perfectly healthy, you feel great, and we can put a cat into the room and your allergies start. Okay, that would suggest that the cat causes allergies, but only for you. And that's what, scientifically, we can only say that the cat causes allergies for that one person, not for people, right? So that becomes more complicated. You're telling me your mom wants a cat? I don't know why I need to know that. So anyway, you understand what I'm saying? Give me a yes or no. Do you understand how we talk carelessly about science? How we talk sloppily about material things? We don't even realize how bad it is, the way we talk about things. And we've got to learn to be careful. Now, remember, a theory is fine. You can say, I have a theory. Like, for example, I have a theory. I have a theory that pleasure is medicine. Pleasure is like medicine. And I can give all kinds of examples. If there's something you really like, it can take away symptoms of sickness. For example, when I work on the farm, I get bad allergies. I get, my eyes get all itchy. I start sneezing and stuff like that. When I come in the house, what I'll do is I'll just eat a cup of ice cream. And the ice cream will calm down all my allergies and make everything calm, because pleasure is like medicine. Now, I would not say that that's scientific. I would say that that's a theory that I have. I think pleasure is medicine. So if I'm feeling sick, what do you do if you're feeling sick? You'll like, your mother might get you some sherbet or some ice cream or some ginger ale, right? Maybe some chicken noodle soup. Why is that helpful? Why is that helpful? Is it like medicine? No, because it comforts and it's pleasant and it's nice and it makes you feel better. And sometimes that's what you need. Let me give you another confusing thing to think about. Do people get allergies when they're sleeping? Yes or no? You ever get allergies in the middle of the night when you're sleeping? People don't get allergies when they're sleeping, right? So if you're sleeping with the window open in the middle of the night and there's a lot of pollen in the air, you won't be sneezing, your eyes won't be watering, or you won't feel any allergic reaction when you're sleeping. And yet all of the same things are present. You're breathing, it's the same body, it's the same stuff in the air, but for some reason there's no reaction. Then when you wake up, all of a sudden you wake up, and after a few minutes when you're awake, you'll start sneezing and your eyes will start itching. So how come things don't happen when you're sleeping, but they happen when you're awake, right? So, man, that makes things interesting and confusing. It's obviously more complicated. If I can get somebody to go to sleep, it's as if they're cured of their sicknesses. So that makes things more interesting. So anyway, what I want to challenge you to, and what I'm going to always challenge you to, is that you've got to be very, very careful. If you want to be scientific, you've got to be careful to speak like a scientist, not like a modern scientist, because they're terrible with this stuff. But you've got to learn to not assert things that you can't prove. You've got to learn to say, I don't know, if you don't know. Or if you've got an idea, you've got to learn to say, this is a theory of mine. I think that, Or if there's something that's true of an individual, you've got to limit it to that individual. You can say, you know what? Ice cream makes my allergies go away. I'm talking about myself. I'm not telling you to take ice cream because I have no idea if it will work for you. But for me, so we can see how we have to learn to talk and think carefully about this stuff. All right. The good thing is scientific knowledge is gained by observation. So you're free to experiment. You're free to test things out. That's what's kind of exciting about science. If you've got an idea, you can go test it and try to prove it. That's what real science is. So as we study this book, I want to finish up here. I know it's time to go. As we study this book, as you listen to people talk about medicine and science and food and all kinds of stuff, what I want you to become sensitive to is, do people make scientific claims with no scientific evidence? And I want you to become sensitive to that. You're going to be amazed at how common it is and how commonly we just, drink all this information in when there's no evidence for it. I want you to become sensitive to that. Okay. I want you to be allergic to scientific talk when there's no evidence. Okay. Because that's what science is. It's okay to say you believe something. It's okay to say you think something. It's okay to say you have a theory. But if you're going to say something as a matter of fact, and you're talking about material things, you've got to be able to provide the proof, or you're just, preaching religion to people to believe. So that's topic for today. We know what science is now. We know what matter is now. We talked about what biology is. We talked about the two divisions of biology. And we talked about the fact that knowledge in science is gained by observation. And if you don't observe it, you shouldn't go around saying it, because that's simply not scientific. All right, so that's all for today. I think our time is up. I think we're actually over time, so we'll wrap up for today. If you have any questions about this stuff, feel free to ask me. This is part of philosophy. We have to learn to be careful. So any questions, any interesting topics you see, if you see any interesting news stories, I'd love to talk about them. Feel free to bring questions like that to our science classes. We'll dig into stuff like that, but learn to be careful with scientific talk. All right. That's all for today. If you've got any questions, I'll hang out for a bit and chat, but otherwise you're free to go. Okay. Thanks for coming, guys. Take care.